is Bible Study That Doesn't Suck, and I am Pastor Megan Rohr, and this is a special Christmas edition. I thought we'd talk a little bit about the story of Jesus' birth. Most people think they know the story because they've watched a lot of Christmas movies, or they've gone to a lot of nativity plays, but because this is Bible Study That Doesn't Suck, we're going to talk about the versions that are in the Bible. So let's start with the Charlie Brown Christmas version, also known as the Gospel of Luke. And so the bit that Linus is reading is the part about the angels and the shepherds and Mary and Joseph, depicted as white people here because this nativity is from Ireland, and you'll find that nativities often look very similar to the culture from which they were found. So for example, this is from Nicaragua, and this might also be from Nicaragua. Maybe it's from Mexico, can't remember. But Jesus looks Latino in these depictions, and so depending upon where you get your nativity set, you can find a very diverse Jesus. We're not entirely sure of what Jesus' race was. We know that he was Jewish. So, in the book of Luke, it is a story that is quite interestingly told. The Gospel of Luke is the Gospel of the poor, so it's not surprising that Jesus is born to what seems like a poor family. But what's really unique about the Gospel of Luke is that the angel that lets everyone know that Jesus is going to be born doesn't come to Joseph first, comes to Mary first. And there's a whole story actually about Elizabeth and Zechariah, who are the parents of John the Baptist, and John the Baptist was much more popular politically during the time, and in Luke's story is the cousin of Jesus. And this story is told in the Gospel of Luke in the way that if you've ever heard a mother tell the story of having a baby, it has all of the details that if a mother was going to tell the story, they would tell. So there's a moment when Mary and Elizabeth see each other and the baby jumps inside of Elizabeth's womb. She spends 3 or 4 months with Elizabeth while this pregnancy is happening. This is the story where they have to go on a census journey. There's a ruler who requires there to be a census for the purpose of having people pay taxes, and so they have to go on a long journey. This politically happened between 4 and 6 BCE, so after. So some people think that Jesus was born on date 0. That's not what happens in the Gospel of Luke, according to when this ruler had their census. And part of the reason that they go on this long trek is because a lot of the Old Testament stories said that the Messiah, which this story is going to argue Jesus becomes, had to be born in a particular city, in the town of Bethlehem. And they're from Nazareth. So how does this baby who's from Nazareth get born in Bethlehem if it truly is the Messiah? And so this is the story about why that happens. Is it historically accurate? We have no idea. A census did take place, so maybe that happened. In Luke's Gospel, that's the story. And you also have other markers that a mother would tell. You have the first time, you have Jesus' circumcision, so a faith ritual is recorded in this text. It's not recorded in the other texts. The first time Jesus runs away at age 12 is recorded in the Gospel of Luke, which anyone who has had a child can remember a time when their child has run away, and that's been an important moment in their story. So it's a beautiful story told from the point of view of Mary and from a very feminist perspective. So it's a great story. Matthew, which is the other main gospel text that has a nativity story about the birth of Jesus, tells the story very differently. And here's where I have to have you take a journey with me. So rather than being someone who believes that every single word of the story, every single bit in the Bible has to be 100% true from a historical way, from a science way, from a religious way. Otherwise, none of it exists. Instead of that, this is Bible study that doesn't suck, and we believe that these stories are about reminding us that this person is bigger than us, smarter than us, is like God, and so we try to tell this story with the best human words that we can in a way to get this message across. And so the way that Matthew's gospel tries to get this message across is to tell the story of Jesus as if he was Moses, right? Because in that tradition of storytelling, it was okay to tell the biography of a person that everyone agreed was important and special, and to use that birth narrative for whomever this person you are telling a story about is, if you want to give them really good street cred, right? So that was the way of telling stories. That's where the tradition of talking about heroes being conceived immaculately comes from. There's a lot of stories of that in Greek mythology, fathered by Zeus, right? So it comes out of this storytelling tradition. It's like Once Upon a Time. We wouldn't take Once Upon a Time literally. And so some of the bits of this story in Matthew's text are meant to show you that this person is in a line of prophets, that it comes from a Jewish lineage, but maybe isn't necessarily historically the way everything happened. So there's different rulers, and in Matthew's text, Jesus is thought to be born different years than in Luke's gospel, by a couple of years based on the political leaders. And again, it's just how you're trying to put the story into space and time. So in this story, like Moses, when Jesus is born, King Herod knows how important this baby is and wants to kill all of the babies up to the age of 2. Because the little Magi's, we three kings people, again, these versions are white, but they were Zoroastrians, a type of religion that came from the Middle East, so that's probably not a historical accuracy. But the idea was that people who knew about astrology, who knew how the world worked, would have known that this baby was really important. We don't know if that was really true, that political leaders thought that this baby was really important. It doesn't even seem that political leaders thought Jesus was important after he grew up and after his death, because they didn't write about him in history books except for to talk about his much more famous older brother. But in this story, remember, we're following the model of Moses. And in Moses' story, there was a time when they were trying to kill all of the infants. So there's a story about that in the beginning of Matthew. There's a genealogy that tries to trace Jesus all the way back to those Jewish kings that had come before him, although that lineage is on Joseph's side. And if Jesus, in fact, is born of Immaculate Conception, or through a dark force coming over Mary, a dark cloud, as it says in the text, which might hint to maybe Mary being raped in an act of war. The lineage of Joseph wouldn't necessarily apply to Jesus, so Matthew tries to have it every which way. But in this story, Herod sends out the Magi to go and find Jesus and to make sure that all the kids under the age of 2 are killed. But instead, when they find Jesus at age 2, they're blown away, they think he's fantastic, they bring him gifts, and they disobey Herod. So this is kind of like not the like fancy story that you'd necessarily tell little kids about. But it's funny that in our nativity plays that are most often performed by kids, we have the Magi's coming and put into the text that involves the shepherds, which, by the way, are in the Gospel of Luke, not in Matthew. But we kind of mish it all together when we do a normal nativity scene. Okay, so John. John is the Gospel text that's typically read today on Christmas Day, and it's kind of a confusing, hypnotic text. It comes from thinkers rather than people who are telling a literal story about life and death and birth. So you won't find details in the book of John. Instead, you'll find like mystic poetry that tries to get the feeling of what this means. And John links Jesus all the way back to the beginning of time to say that in the Genesis text, when God is creating the world, Jesus is there too. And so it's weaving even deeper the story of Jesus with those Hebrew texts that are in previous chapters of our Bible. But in John's Gospel, there's no angels, there's no manger, there's no Immaculate Conception. There's just this idea that God is the creative force, that Jesus is this creative force that changes the world. A little bit easier to believe if you come from a place where you don't scientifically believe in Immaculate Conception, or where you don't understand why there's different political leaders, and Jesus was born at this time in this book and this time in this other book. So maybe this mystical text is for you. The Gospel of Mark departs even farther from that. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus' birth is not recorded at all. And the text begins with Jesus' baptism and the world being torn in two and people trying to figure out if Jesus is a demon or is a human. And this text, that questioning, is this person the Messiah, is answered yes by demons and no by his family, by political leaders, by church leaders, and is told in such a way that if at the end of the story you didn't answer, hey, this guy is a part of what's going on in God's creation, it would seem narratively that you had not paid attention. So there's no angels, no manger, no Immaculate Conception, just a baptism. And so Mark and John are placing the Christmas story as a story that's not about Jesus' birth in the world, but about our birth as children of God. And for John, this happens when we are called into being by words that are the way that this God creates. And for Mark, this happens that we become children of God through our baptism and through the rituals of the church. So that's the story of Jesus. Probably you'll just hear Luke in the future because it's happy, kind, and has shepherds. So enjoy your Christmas. Merry Christmas. Enjoy your nativity sets. Collect some that have more than just white people in them. I need to do better about that. And enjoy your year. This is the beginning of the church year. Be well all. Bye.